Blessing of being able to make it to see another year and then get used to saying 2026 and not 2025. So let's see here. We should be in Ezekiel this morning. We always tend to skip a lot of chapters, and we know Ezekiel was a prophet and a priest, and we're talking about a time period prior to captivity by the Babylonians, and so he had a daunting task of being able to prepare the people for what was imminent. God provides people to be able to go in and speak for him and let you know where things might be going wrong, and gives you an opportunity to make some corrections, we know there was obviously a split already between the northern and southern part of Israel, and the northern tribe was referred to Israel, those 10 tribes, and those 2 southern tribes referred to as Judah, Judah and Benjamin, and there were some cultural differences between the groups, and they didn't seem eye to eye, although they're supposed to be brothers, a lot of times the things that were going on with the north, instead of them getting back with the south and coming back together, they wanted to side with the groups that were residing amongst them and all, and so they look at those, other Canaanite, Perizzite tribes and all, and say, hey, we come to you for comfort or for protection or for things of that nature, and so the things that they were doing, they fell to captivity a little bit sooner, and big brother's supposed to go in and say, hey, you know how you fight with your brothers and all, but then when things happen outside of the house, you say, hey man, you can't do that. That's my brother, we are brother's greatest support. But when we get home, we can't stand that stuff. That how it work, Brother Wilmer?
That's true.
Yeah. You know the brother though, you got all those sisters, don't you? No, you got 2 brothers.
Man, it was 5 of us.
Yeah.
I was the youngest.
Yeah.
They used to tear my head up.
That's what happens when you babies.
And getting all that too.
Yeah.
I'm a witness.
You must be like David, huh? The youngest run and get everything, and
I learned how to run.
oh, okay.
I learned how to call my mother that quick.
Yeah. But we tend to have issues sometimes with siblings because of different differences and all, and we haven't seen that with Kings that says well, Leah's my favorite, and then you look at the offspring that she has, and why is it that we treat certain ones this way, and we've got a wife Leah and Rachel and all, and why is Rachel's kids treated one way and Leah's kids treated a different way and all, and those things happen and all, but again, once things happen outside of the house, we're supposed to take care of family, but the tribes could not get along with one another, and instead of saying, hey, let's go in and help out, they pointed fingers and say, look at what happened to big brother Israel over there, but that ain't gonna happen to us. We must be doing something right, and both groups were not following the ways of God. They were not sticking with the covenant, and God provided numerous prophets to tell both the north and the south what was going wrong and where they needed to change. But because consequences weren't happening immediately, people sometimes they say, you telling me I need to change, and then they say, okay, let me start examining it. I don't see nothing negative happening, and so you must be talking to somebody else. And they ignored the things that happened with Israel, and so Judah continues down their sinful path. And Ezekiel's coming about at a time when captivity has happened, and he's preparing them for what's fixing to happen, in the return. And as you're telling people, and you're in captivity for 70 years, and sometimes you lose all hope in what God has done for you and all. And we look at all the different verses that come about, while they're in captivity with Lamentations and all, and the people are crying out and telling God, if you'll just give me another chance, I'll change and I'll do these things different and all. And it's interesting, they were still sinning, some of them, while they were there. And once they were even released and all, you've got an opportunity that Cyrus and Darius has released them and said, go back home and go rebuild. And some of them chose they wanted to stay. And it's because, you become comfortable sometimes within sin, as well, we didn't act right, and God had to take something from us, and we had to go through a time period of humbleness and all. And while I'm being humbled, the world is sending me things to lick my wounds. And, at some point you say, hey, I'm not supposed to be doing this because this is what the common folk do and all, but boy, it sure do feel good licking your wounds this way. And I think I'm going to lay in this for a little bit and let me lie in my misery and all. And people don't do that nowadays, do they?
No.
Yeah.
It feels good.
It feels good, huh? When you get humbled and all, and you go through that time period of trying to get back right with God, Satan tries to find some way to keep you in that and say, man, there's nothing wrong with getting knocked off your pedestal for a minute. Let everybody else do things for a minute. Sit here and lick your wounds and enjoy life a little bit and all, and let you look at all the things you've been missing out on. Ezekiel was trying to warn them that here's how we ended up in this situation in the first place. And we need to get back right with God. And here's what's coming down the line. And so prophetically speaking, obviously, he wasn't there when the people were released, but he's able to tell them here's exactly what's going to happen. Now, the only way he was able to see that is because it was shown to him. Obviously, these first 42 chapters and all, it talks about the visions and all that happened, and him being caught up, and him being shown all these different things and all. And, obviously, with him being a priest, it helped as well. He's got a lineage of here's what's been taught to him, of here's what's to understand, what to expect and all, but not all priests were prophets. And so although he's a priest and he's able to go into the Holy of Holies and have these conversations with God, God was also working with showing him prophetic visions. And not only do you get to see that, but you have the responsibility now going to tell people, here's what it is that God has shown me. Imagine that I go to my priest, and my priest can atone for my sins, and the priest is able to communicate with God, and that's a wonderful thing. But to know also that my priest is also prophetic, and God speaks through him and shows him things, and to know that, man, I can go in and talk to this person, and he might be able to give me some clarity and understanding as to why my life is the way that it is. One might take that and decide to make changes with it, right? Did they make those changes, though? And here's what's going to happen, and here's when Cyrus is going to come, and they're going to, and he might not even use those names. Sometimes they just will tell you, here's the particular thing that's going to happen and all, and one should be able to add those things up and say, oh, well, I remember when he talked about this, and he said this was going to happen in this particular way.
They had kind of strayed so far away, and the teaching
Yeah.
had been lost unto them.
Yeah. Those things unfortunately happen, and so it mentioned a time period of 30 years. We don't know that 30 years was maybe he was 30 years old at that time. That name Ezekiel means God is strong, or God strengthens. It says Ezekiel allegedly didn't write the book, but these were things that were prophecies that were collected by others. And so as he did all these particular things and said all these things were going to happen, other people started writing down or orally communicating that I remember this situation that happened. I remember this that happened. didn't necessarily give them any advice that you need to go walk through the furnace or you need to tell them no, but you need to trust God. Yeah. But supposedly Ezekiel, during these visions and all, he was told to eat the scroll, and so can you imagine that you're caught up and you're getting to see God, and so as God comes in and talks to him and all, we know that the imagery that they list is always something that's supernatural. First of all, it was like a mighty roaring wind or a waterfall is how he describes it and all, and so you think of how majestic. I've never seen a waterfall in person. We were talking about going to upper New York and seeing one at one point, and we went to New York City instead. I was looking at the prices and all of flying into upper New York versus flying into New York City. I said, man, it's cheaper to go to New York City. Why don't we just go there instead? But supposedly one day we want to go back and see Niagara Falls, and so I can just imagine, you think of something as grand as it is, and how it sounds and all, and this is how he's describing the majesty of God's presence being there, and you can't fathom how to even talk or listen to God from hearing that, but at some point he goes from describing the presence of God as a mighty roaring waterfall to now God's having this conversation with him. He's being led by some guide, into being able to see all this. And as this communication's happening with him and he's taking it all in, we can imagine that sometimes you just want, man, what happened? He goes prostrate immediately because no one's worthy of being, in the presence of God. You realize that this ain't human. This ain't man-made. This ain't something that's natural. This is God. And I ain't worthy. And you naturally should go down that way.
Amen.
And then God talks to him and soothes him, and I can imagine him touching him and saying, get up, son, let me have this conversation with you, and let me explain to you why you're encountering all this. But as you're encountering, I want you to eat this up. You know that we're able to describe someone so well when we sit at our seat, we're comfortable, and we're eating on it and all, right? And that's the imagery that he's wanting to give you and all. And sometimes when you're sitting in a setting like this, or you're sitting in a classroom, and you think of taking notes and all, and you think about going back and describing it to someone, man, I forgot all the stuff that they told me because it just wasn't in the right setting. But when you sup with someone, and you sit down, and you're comfortable, and able to kick your shoes off, and you're able to get a little bit in and all, man, I can tell you everything that happened, man.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what this imagery was with Ezekiel is, take this scroll, and he's not physically eating it, but he's taking it all the essence of God in to be able to share it with others. It says here in our first verse here that afterwards he brought me to the gate, even the gate that looketh toward the east. And so if you think of how the temple gates were set up and all, and he could have went through any particular entrance and all, but he says he brought him through this particular entrance. It's because we know that he also showed him in previous verses when God left their presence, that's the same gate he went out of. And so he brings him back to this gate for a reason, but we also know that there are specific events that happen in the Bible that specifically mention that particular entrance, and also the way that entrance was in, you was able to see into the Holy of Holies from there. And we know that God said his son's going to be coming back from the east. The son came in from the east, and so there's specific references to why it is that it was that particular gate that they used.
Amen. Moses always set the tabernacle up.
Yep.
Facing the east.
Yeah.
Is that why the Muslims face the east and pray to?
Supposedly. I don't know, I'm not Muslim.
Oh, I forgot.
I did teach a little geography for a little bit, yeah, but it is all biblical as well, and it goes back because, they supposedly have the same first 5 books and all, and here's what our father Abraham said for us to do, and we need to go in and do these particular things, and supposedly they facing Mecca, the holy city and all, and
Yeah.
I know you was in the Middle East for a little bit, I'm sure you saw that happening all the time.
Oh, yeah.
But he says, behold, the glory of the God of Israel came from the way of the east, and his voice was like a noise of many waters. waters, and the earth shined with his glory. The earth at some point did shine with his glory. And because these people, the covenant people could not follow what was supposed to be done, his glory left them. And he said it left them out of that particular gate there. And so anytime we come back to God, we got to come back to God the way he left and come back to him that way if we want things to be restored. And so it's interesting every time these prophets or these priests or these people always talk about coming back to God, they go back to the very beginning of when the covenant was established. Remember in the beginning when God established this covenant, these are the things that he told us to do. Remember when they were coming out of the wilderness, these are the things that he gave them and told these people to do. Remember, and so it's always the same. So we think of that as well in 2026 as we're talking to constituents that we hadn't seen and we're bringing them back in. Let me go back to when you first accepted God and remember the things that he told you to do and all, and to have no other gods before me, and to love me like, and to do these things here and all, and that's the way that you come back in. Ezekiel was giving them the pattern of, here's what's going to happen when the end of captivity happens, and as we're returning to go back to God, is we need to do things in this particular way, and he said he's going to come back in through this interest the same way he left. So he's reminding people, God has left you because you chose the wrong things. But when you make the right choices again and go back to God, he's going to return and he's going to come right back through that same gate.
You know, he drove old Adam and Eve out from the garden eastward.
Yep. Some significance in it, huh?
Yeah.
He says it was according to the appearance of the vision. So if someone's questioning how it is he knows this, he tells you right there, it was a vision that he saw. And even according to the vision that I saw when I came to destroy the city, and the visions were like the vision that I saw by the river Shebar, and I fell upon my face. So he came in, Ezekiel's telling him, I come in at some point and told you about God destroying. And it's just when it happened is when I was walking by this specific river is when I received that vision. But just like I received that vision and I was able to extrapolate upon everything that happened, this same type of situation happened when he brought another vision to me. And so these people that are familiar with these prophets and all and how they receive these visions, now regardless of whether they receive them while they're in bed asleep or while they're walking amongst you, you know, just like Paul's walking down the Damascus road and he receives a vision as he's in the middle of the day, and you think of the light that shines in the middle of the day, and he's describing, because there's no, if he's out in the desert and there's nothing to block it, you think of how bright it is out there, but then you talk about this light that's bright that shines all about, no one can see, and he's explaining all these things. These people understand this was some supernatural and all. That man was caught up in a vision and all when he received this information. That information didn't come from Ezekiel, but it came from God.
It's like old Paul, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And he says, I fell upon my face when I received it. Again, because you realize that this is God that's speaking. So the glory of the Lord came into the house by the way of the gate whose prospect is toward the east. And the Spirit took me up and brought me into the inner court. And behold, the glory of the Lord filled the house. And so, obviously, there's courts set up within the temple. We realize that God can speak to you at any place. But he's a priest. He brought him into the court, you know, and said, hey, let's do things right and in order. And so as we're coming and consulting with God and all, and we normally go, and this is what their procedure was at that time, is we go into God's house to go speak to him. And so, again, we're reminding the people and all, when it's time for them to be released from captivity, is that when they go back to go visit with God, let's go do things right and in order. And that's the same way that he did it. Is I got caught up in a vision, and even in the vision, it still took me inside the inner courts in order to go speak with God. And he says, I heard him speaking into me out of the house, and the man stood by me. So someone escorted him and has been having a conversation with him all this time, and he says the man, and so all we know is there was some angelic being and all that's been with him, that's been guiding him in all this time. In other words, he might have got lost, huh?
Hey, you know he was nervous. Need somebody there to hold your hand.
Yes, sir. We need somebody to hold our hands when we're going through things too, don't we?
Yes, sir.
And instead of sometimes we give folks some advice and we turn them loose, son, then we don't understand why they couldn't come back, you know. We all got here because someone held our hands through that period as well.
Amen.
You know, I think I have an aunt and uncle that email or text me daily, and you know, Pastor George talks all the time about calling his boys every day and his girls as well, and having prayer with them in the mornings and all. And I've got an aunt and uncle that live in Detroit, and that's become our regular thing and all. Is you know, there's some texts go between us every morning and all, and there's prayer that happens and all. And you think of, you know, how you make it in life with all the things that go on, and you think of the folks that's praying for you, and you hoping that they're not folks that's praying against you and all that time. Those enemies of yours that want to do things to you in the flesh, and I know sometimes we focus on that because we get to see them, and they say stuff to us, and they want to do it to us right there in the open. But ain't it great that we have folks that we don't necessarily see in person that's praying for you in the gap and all, that God will continue to keep his hands of protection around you, that he won't go out that gate and leave you alone.
Amen. Amen. I like that.
So he says, I heard him speaking unto me out of the house, and the man stood by me. And he said unto me, Son of man. I know we've seen that term before somewhere else, haven't we?
Yeah.
So in the New Testament, we see Son of Man, and it is associated with Jesus.
Amen.
And in the Old Testament, because Jesus hadn't walked on earth yet, there were times that they used that phraseology and all with common man and Son of Man, you know, and so he was referring to Ezekiel with that phraseology and all, Son of Man. The place of my throne, the place of the soles of my feet. And so we know that we're talking about God because only God can say my throne and my feet. And so we realize that God sits on his throne in heaven and the soles of his feet rest on earth. And it's because he's in control of both heaven and in earth. Right. And so he's reminding Ezekiel at this time and all that I'm the great and almighty that has a throne that sits here, and I reign over everything that you see and you don't see. And he says, I'll dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever. So we realize when we first opened it, we said that he had his spirit had left them, and he's coming back. But he said, I don't have to reside with them here just in a building. You know, they had that problem of that fallacy of doing that, of thinking God was only with them if they was in the temple, or I got to be in Israel. You know, we're in a foreign country and all. God ain't with us. God wasn't with you because you went to a foreign country. God wasn't with you because you chose to ignore God and follow idols. God, we got to bring the ark with us, and also God can be with us when we go to battle. Let's carry the ark. Can you imagine they going into battle? And you know, back in the day and all, they used to have those folks with the flags that would go in front of them, and the folks playing the drums going before them. And then, can you imagine bringing the ark of the covenant in too? And we got to go to battle with the ark, so we know that God is with us. You won't have to physically carry something to say that God is with you. God said, I'm going to be with you anyway. And here's how we know that now is he put that spirit on us, and we don't have to carry the ark with us, or say, I got my cross in my hand. We watch these movies all the time, and I got to go fight the devil. I got to hit my cross in my hand. We don't have to physically carry anything. He's already there with us. He said the spirit. He says, the midst of the children, I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever. And my holy name shall the house of Israel no more defile. Neither shall their kings buy their whoredom, nor their carcasses or their kings in their high places. They claimed that they had to be in the temple to be with God. But while they were going in the temple, they were worshiping other gods. And it says sometimes there were walls dividing, and well, while they were trying to worship God within the temple, right on the other side of the wall, they were worshiping other stuff. So how good is that when I say I walk into church, I'm on holy ground, I'm gonna walk into church, I'm gonna be church-like and holy and Christian and all, I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna worship God, and as soon as I walk out that door right there, I can go worship something else and I'm good, right?
You done done your time in here.
Yeah. Church is over, it's 12 o'clock, I can go outside and I can go act a fool out there, right?
You punch the time clock.
And then when I want to be back with God, we go run into church real quick. You know, again, that's what you see in the movies and all. They get to run from Satan, these vampires, whatever it is, and they got to run into church and all because God's going to protect me in there. And I know that's supposed to be humor and all for movies and all, but people do that in real life, don't they? Well, when I go to church, I'm going to act this way. And I'm going to be revered, and I'm going to revere God, and I'm going to trust God, and I'm going to talk to God, and I'm going to let God lead me while I'm in the church. And then when I walk out here, it's all on me again.
I forgot he was with you.
Yeah. And so he says by the whoredom. So in other words, we normally associate that with physically with man being with someone other than their spouse. But God is saying that this is exactly what you're doing.
Amen.
We consider those people detestable because this is what they do is they lie with anyone. Well, these people were worshiping anything and anyone right outside of the temple. As soon as they left, you can go to worship service, and as soon as they leave, they're going and worshiping something else right on the other side of the wall there. So if there's any question as to why it is that we're in captivity, this is exactly what you did. And not only did you do it, but your leaders were doing it. And the leaders convinced the priests that this is what they're supposed to do.
That's a long fall.
It is a long fall. Ezekiel had prophesied with several kings and all, and so it's amazing how some of these kings will go in and they try to fix some things, and then as soon as that king will die, you've got another succession of 2 or 3 of them that was just as evil as, and it's funny how they talk about this one was evil than all the ones before, and then the next guy comes along and he was more evil than all the ones before him.
Amen.
As soon as you get someone to remove all the detestable things out of the temple, you had all these others that were bringing the stuff back in there. So while some of this was going on outside of it, there was stuff that was happening within the church as well that was detestable, and because all those things were going on, this is why these guys are in the predicament that they're in. It says, in their setting of their threshold by my thresholds, and their post by my post, and the wall between me and them, they have even defiled my holy name by their abominations, and they have committed, wherefore I have consumed them in my anger. So that's exactly what God said is, in their house they were committing the sins, and within God's house they were committing. So because not only did they don't even see that there is again, there shouldn't be a difference between the way you act outside of church and the way you act inside of church. But some people should at least realize that, man, mama and daddy's right there, I got to straighten up. The principal's there, I got to straighten up. Well, God is right there, I got to straighten up. They didn't care anymore that they were in the presence of God. They said, oh, it's God's house.
But brother teacher, I done joined church, and
God should accept me for who I am.
And so, I shouldn't be able to just go to hell.
Yeah.
I done joined church. Huh? God don't send me to hell.
Hell's gonna be full of church folks.
Because all they did was join.
Yeah.
They didn't accept Jesus as Lord and Savior.
Once we join, we go through a refining process. And our goal is between now and the time we meet our Maker is to be refining what we are and what we want to be, and we want to continue to become more Christ-like. And so that's the procedure that we go through, regardless of whether you be the seasoned pastor or you be someone who's new, you know, that sits on the back row, is we're all in the same boat of refining and getting better constantly as we're in here, you know, and our goal should be to continue to improve and get more like Christ, and not come in here and say, well, because I've been going, I can just do whatever now. I'm accepted. He says, let them put away their whoredom and the carcasses of their kings far from me, and I will dwell in the midst of them forever. So if we want to know what do we need to do for God to come back in, because we said God went out. So what do we need to do? Because we've been over here in Lamentations crying, saying, here's all the things that happened. If you'll just give it back to me, I'll do this. Well, how come is it God ain't answering?
Behold,
Yeah.
I stand at the door and knock. You gotta let him in.
Mm-hmm. But you know, in order to let God in, you got to get rid of some stuff. We do that when someone comes to visit, don't we? You know, we just got through dealing with a holiday, and I know we all had some family members visit. And whenever they came in to visit, we cleaned our house, didn't we? Because, you know, sometimes we live and, you know, it's funny, you know, you do some routine cleaning once a week or so, or, you know, some of us clean a little more often than that. And do that regular dusting and sweeping and mopping and this and that. And I got somebody coming to visit, well, I got to go in and do all this extra detail cleaning and all, but.
Just a minute.
Yeah. But we want to invite God in, and then we don't want to clean nothing out. But we do it for our neighbor.
Well,
So obviously we're referencing cleaning your own temple is what we're talking about. In case anyone's confused, is, you know, your body's a temple. And if God lives within us, and we want God to reside within us, the only way God's going to reside is if we got to clean out all that dirt. Clean out all the trash. That's exactly what Ezekiel was telling them. You want God to reside within you again, get rid of all that other stuff you've been worshiping. He says, thou son of man, show the house to the house of Israel. So we're obviously showing them what the temple's supposed to look like. So he was describing it all, the cubits and all, and here's how it was supposed to be built and all. But again, we hadn't got to the New Testament yet and talking about God residing within you. But God resided within some of them before Christ came. So how did Abraham do what he did? How did Moses do what he did? You know, because God resided, they allowed themselves to be the temple for God. And we want to reference those guys and say, well, the forefathers did this and all. And you know what the difference is between those forefathers and you? Is they cleaned out their temple and they allowed God to reside within them and lead their life. Here's what it is that you need to be doing. And that way you may be ashamed of their iniquities and let them measure the pattern. And if they are ashamed of all that they've done, show them the form of the house and the fashion thereof and the goings out and thereof and comings in thereof and all the forms thereof and all the ordinances thereof and all the forms thereof and all the laws thereof, and write it in their sight that they may keep the whole form thereof and all the ordinance thereof and do them. Again, all of that's saying is teach people how things should go, how they're supposed to behave in situations, how they're supposed to worship God, how they're supposed to get rid of all the other things. But you know, unfortunately, some things go in one ear and out the other, right? And we say, well, I told them already. Tell them again.
is that what's happening in the school?
Come on up there and see.
Yeah, I'm talking about, you know,
Yeah.
we send our children up there. And
Yeah.
we let y'all teach them. I ain't
Yeah.
gonna teach them nothing. You train.
Train them up in the way they should go, huh?
You got it.
I'm gonna let someone else do it.
You got a job.
So Ezekiel is telling them, here's what God has sent me to tell you. If you want to get things right and in order, then I've got to come in and show you from baby steps again, regardless of whether you want to hear it or not. At some point, you jumped off the train and all. And so I got to start from the very beginning. Let's go back to the first station you was on. When you first boarded this and you said, I want to join church. And let me go back and remind you of all these different ordinances and procedures of all the things that you're supposed to be doing, just like your baby again. You back to drinking milk again. And then we'll eventually work our way back into all these other things. I got 2 minutes. I got you. So this is the law of the house. Upon the top of the mountain, the whole limit thereof round about shall be most holy. Behold, this is the law of the house. Holiness honors God was the title of this. And so in order for us to honor God, we got to get back holy. So in other words, these people weren't holy anymore. And they were claiming to be, because simply they were Jews. They said, man, I'm in the family of Judah. So I'm naturally holy, as brother said. I joined church and all this, so I'm good.
Yeah.
But in order for God to come back, you got to restore that holiness that you had, is what he said. Amen.
Amen.
Thank Brother Anderson for the lesson today.